The quiet of Oakwood Estates, Georgia shattered with the sound of heels striking pavement. Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, stormed across the cul-de-sac like a prosecutor headed for trial. In her hand flapped an orange violation notice, not paper, but a weapon. She climbed the porch steps of Thomas and Margaret Green, an elderly black couple who had lived here longer than she'd been alive. Her voice sliced the air. "Mr. and Mrs. Green, your ramp violates Section 4, Subpart 2. Remove it immediately, or the HOA will remove it for you, at your expense." The violation stood plain for all to see, a sturdy wooden ramp, nothing more. For Thomas, 72, it meant freedom from falls. He steadied himself on the railing, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. "This is my property. The ramp keeps me alive. That doesn't break any law." Karen's smile was razor-thin. "It breaks community standards. No exceptions. You have 24 hours. Across the street, blinds flicked open. Neighbors stepped out, phones lifted, recording. Some frowned, others just watched. Was this really happening in broad daylight? Margaret stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "For 40 years we've paid our dues. This house is ours. We don't need permission to be safe." Karen adjusted her sunglasses. "Dues don't excuse non-compliance. If you can't abide by the rules, maybe Oakwood Estates isn't the right fit for you." The words cracked like a whip. Gasps rippled through the crowd. One neighbor whispered, "She didn't just say that." But no one moved. Why wasn't anyone stepping in? Thomas's jaw tightened. "We're not leaving," he said, voice steady as stone. "Not now, not ever." Karen tapped her phone, each keystroke deliberate. "Security will be here soon. Then we'll see who's in charge." The silence swelled, thick and suffocating. Margaret leaned toward her husband. "She can't actually do this, can she?" But everyone knew Karen's talent twisting rules into weapons. Could she pull it off again? Then slam! A car door cracked the air like thunder. Heads turned. Heavy boots struck the pavement in a slow, deliberate rhythm. A tall figure emerged from behind a parked car, uniform pressed, medals blazing in the sun. He walked with an authority that silenced the street without a word. Karen froze mid-sentence. Neighbors lowered their phones, breath caught in their throats. Who was this man, and why did his presence change everything? The soldier's gaze locked on the woman standing on his parents' porch. His voice cut like a blade. "Is this how you treat homeowners in Oakwood Estates?" The silence after his words clung to the street like humidity. Karen Whitmore blinked at the man in uniform, struggling to regain her composure. For the first time, her certainty faltered, but she quickly pressed her lips into a thin line. "Who exactly are you?" she demanded, voice sharp but thinner than before. The man didn't answer immediately. He walked past the cluster of neighbors, each step deliberate, until he stood beside his parents on the porch. He placed a hand on his mother's shoulder and gave his father a nod, a silent gesture of strength. Only then did he turn back to Karen. "My name," he said evenly, "is Andre Green. I grew up in this house, and right now I'd like to know why you're threatening my parents over something that keeps them safe." A ripple moved through the onlookers. A few lowered their phones, not out of disinterest, but because they wanted both eyes on what was unfolding. Karen recovered enough to sneer. "This isn't about safety, it's about compliance. The HOA rules are clear. Installations must be approved. That ramp wasn't." Thomas spoke up, his voice heavy with years of patience stretched thin. "I fell last winter, nearly broke my hip. My doctor insisted I install something so I could walk without risking my life. I couldn't wait 3 months for one of your board meetings." Margaret tightened her grip on his arm. "We sent an email, Karen. You ignored it. You always ignore us." That accusation lingered like smoke. Neighbors turned to look at Karen, curious now if it was true. Her jaw worked as if chewing a bitter pill. Andre's gaze didn't waver. "Tell me, Ms. Whitmore, does your rulebook allow exceptions for medical necessity? Or do you believe appearance matters more than a person's life?" Karen's nostrils flared. "The community has standards. Without them, we'd descend into chaos. Ramps here, sheds there, everyone doing as they please. It's my job to preserve order." "Order?" Andre's voice cut through her words like glass. "Or control?" Murmurs surged through the crowd. A man near the curb whispered, "She's losing this." But no one dared speak louder, not yet. Karen straightened, trying to reclaim authority. Look, I don't care who you are. Your parents broke the rules. The HOA has every right to enforce them. Andre tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. You said every right. Let's be precise. HOAs have procedures, written warnings, cure periods, fines, arbitration, maybe a lien if all else fails, but eviction, demolition without consent, that's not authority, that's intimidation. The words dropped like stones into a still pond. The crowd shifted, whispers rising again. Some neighbors nodded, others glanced at Karen, their expressions uneasy. Karen faltered for half a heartbeat, but she forced a tight smile. You don't understand how this works. This is bigger than your parents. Margaret's voice trembled, but it carried more strength than anyone expected. No, Karen, this is exactly about us. Because when you decide we don't belong, you'll do the same to someone else. Maybe next time it's the Johnsons, or the Hernandezes, or anyone you think doesn't fit your picture. The words struck harder than Karen anticipated. Eyes turned to her again, not with admiration, but scrutiny. Thomas's hand shook on the railing, but his voice was steady. All we've ever asked for is respect. We didn't build this ramp to spite you. We built it because we want to live in peace, without fearing a fall every time I step outside. Andre scanned the faces in the crowd, deliberately drawing them in. You've all seen what's happening. If this ramp comes down, it won't just be wood stripped from a porch. It'll be dignity stripped from the people who raised me, paid their dues, and never missed a bill. Ask yourself, what's the real violation here? The neighbors' silence deepened. Phones kept rolling, but now with purpose. They weren't just recording drama, they were documenting injustice. Karen's composure cracked for the first time. She glanced at the glowing screens, the dozens of lenses aimed her way, and a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Still, she pressed forward, voice clipped. This isn't a debate. The HOA has rules. I intend to enforce them. Andre's stare didn't soften. Then enforce them correctly. Show me the section of your bylaws that grants you the power to call this community property when it's deeded land. Show me where it says you can strip away accommodations for someone's health. Karen opened her mouth, then shut it again. For once, words failed her. The tension thickened. Margaret looked at her son with quiet relief, but also fear. Would Karen double down or retreat? The neighbors leaned closer, waiting. Phones lifted higher. The stage was set. The standoff thickened like the heavy Georgia air. Karen clutched her phone tighter, her knuckles pale against the plastic. The glow of neighbors' screens reflected back at her, dozens of tiny eyes recording every twitch, every word. She swallowed, then forced herself to straighten. Everyone here knows I'm the president of this HOA, she declared, voice pitched higher to drown out the tension. The board gave me full authority to enforce the rules. This ramp violates standards, and if it isn't removed, there will be consequences. Andre's posture didn't shift, calm, unyielding. His military training radiated through his stillness. Authority without process is abuse, Ms. Whitmore. You keep saying consequences, but you haven't once said what section gives you that power. Which article? Which line? Show us. The crowd stirred. A neighbor whispered. Yeah. Where's it written? Another muttered. She can't answer that. Karen's eyes darted toward the CC, R-binder clutched by Frank Dawson, her fellow board member lingering at the edge of the lawn. Frank, she barked, read the violation. Section 4, Subpart 2, Exterior Modifications Without Approval. It's all there. Frank hesitated. His thumb flipped the pages, but his voice faltered. It says, exterior modifications require written approval from the board. It doesn't mention ramps or medical exceptions. Andre seized the moment. So you've just admitted there's no explicit prohibition, which means this is interpretation, your interpretation. And your interpretation could cost my father his mobility and my mother her peace of mind. The words hit harder than any raised voice could. The neighbors' murmurs sharpened. Some nodded, some frowned. Karen's jaw clenched. She pivoted quickly. Exceptions aren't the point. Precedent is. If I let one unapproved structure stand, then everyone thinks they can bypass the rules. Today, it's a ramp. Tomorrow, it's a shed, A fence, or worse. That's how neighborhoods decline. Andre's eyes narrowed. So your fear of what-ifs outweighs the lived reality of the people standing in front of you. You'd rather protect hypothetical shrubs than actual lives. A ripple of uneasy laughter rolled through the crowd. Karen's face flushed crimson. Karen doubled down. Laugh all you want, but rules keep this place desirable. Property values depend on me keeping order. If outsiders drive through and see this ramp, they'll think Oakwood Estates doesn't care about appearances. Do you want your homes to lose value? The question hung, poisoned and heavy. Some neighbors glanced at each other. Others folded their arms, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of agreement. Andre's voice cut clean through the hesitation. Do you hear yourself? You're saying a ramp that protects an elderly man from falling somehow threatens thousands of dollars in property value. You're putting dollars over dignity. Tell me what's worth more. My father's safety? Or your idea of a pretty porch? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cicadas seemed to hush. Margaret's hand slipped into Thomas's, their fingers laced tight. Karen's nostrils flared. She jabbed her phone toward the couple. I'm not here to debate morality. I'm here to enforce rules. This isn't personal. It's business. Andre stepped closer, his shadow stretching over the notice in her hand. It became personal the moment you stood on my parents' porch and told them they didn't belong. That wasn't enforcement. That was humiliation. The neighbors shifted again. Some gasped softly, phones tilted for a better angle. Karen's voice cracked, sharper now. You think medals on your chest make you untouchable? This community doesn't run on uniforms. It runs on compliance. I don't care if you're a soldier, a doctor, or the mayor. The rules apply to everyone. Andre's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm demanding equal treatment. If this were your parents, would you demand they wait months for a meeting just to install safety equipment, or would you let them live? Karen faltered, lips parting but no words escaping. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Thomas raised his voice for the first time since the confrontation began, low but commanding. Karen, we helped build this community. We laid roots here before you were even elected. We paid for its sidewalks, its parks, its lighting, and now you're telling us we don't belong? The question struck like thunder. Neighbors' faces shifted from curiosity to recognition. He wasn't exaggerating, he was telling the truth. The Greens had been pillars of Oakwood Estates long before Karen craved control. Karen's fingers trembled around her phone. She pressed buttons quickly, as if dialing backup, but the tremor in her hand betrayed her. Andre leaned forward, his voice calm but deadly precise. Call whoever you want. Police, security, the board. I'll stand right here and explain the law to them. I'll show them the deed, the state accommodation requirements, and your abuse of power. Let's see whose case holds up. A murmur surged through the crowd. Someone whispered, He's right, they'd lose in court. Another muttered, She's finished. Karen snapped, louder now, desperation bleeding through. This community expects me to protect its image. If I don't hold the line, everything falls apart. That's the difference. The words landed like a gavel. Neighbors nodded. For the first time, some lowered their phones and stepped closer, not to side with Karen, but to stand nearer to the Greens. The tide was turning, and Karen could feel it slipping through her grasp. Margaret lifted her chin, her voice steadier than before. We're not ashamed of who we are, and we're not leaving Oakwood Estates. Not today, not ever. The crowd erupted in soft applause, not loud enough to feel like rebellion, but strong enough to remind Karen she wasn't in control anymore. Karen's eyes darted left and right, searching for someone to back her up. Frank, still holding the CC/R binder, looked down at the ground. He wouldn't save her. No one would. Karen's phone hovered near her ear, but she wasn't dialing. Not really. Her finger froze over the screen as the weight of the crowd pressed in. Every neighbor's lens captured her hesitation, and hesitation was poison for a leader who thrived on fear. Andre folded his arms, his voice cutting through the thick air. Go ahead, call. But understand this, when you do, you'll have to explain why an HOA president thinks she can override state law, medical necessity, and basic human decency. Do you want that recorded on every one of these phones? Karen's lips parted, but no words came. Frank Dawson, the board member, still clutching the CCR binder, cleared his throat. Andre, he's right. The CCRs don't authorize demolition without due process. We're supposed to send a notice, then allow 30 days to cure. If the owners contest, it goes to mediation. That's the procedure. Karen spun on him, fury flashing. Whose side are you on? Frank shifted uncomfortably. The side of the rules, not personal vendettas. The neighbors murmured louder now. For the first time, Karen's authority wasn't just being questioned, it was unraveling in front of her. Andre stepped closer, his presence steady as stone. Miss Whitmore, you've misused your position long enough. My parents have endured years of your notices, your threats, your constant harassment. But tonight, it ends. Because the whole community just saw the truth. You're not protecting Oakwood Estates. You're persecuting its residents. Karen's eyes flickered. For a brief second, she looked almost cornered. Then her chin shot up, her voice sharp as glass. You think you can embarrass me into silence? You're mistaken. I'll bring this to the board. I'll have the Greens fined into submission if I have to. Andre didn't flinch. Fined into submission? That's your philosophy? Not community, not fairness, just punishment? Then let's put it to the board right now. Frank's here. The neighbors are here. Let's take a vote. Do you stand by your decision? The suggestion rippled through the crowd like electricity. Heads turned toward Frank, then toward Karen. Phones angled higher, capturing every second. A board vote in the open, with witnesses? That wasn't how Karen operated. She thrived in closed rooms and whispered threats. Frank hesitated. Karen, maybe we should. But Andre pressed harder, his voice booming now, commanding like a drill sergeant. Enough with maybe. This isn't about bylaws anymore. It's about respect. You stood on this porch and told my parents they didn't belong in the neighborhood they've paid into for decades. Say it again on camera. Say it to every neighbor watching this live. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers tightened on her phone until it shook. A voice from the crowd broke the quiet. Yeah, Karen. Say it again. Another voice followed. You don't represent us. You represent yourself. Karen's face drained of color. For the first time, she looked small, the fortress of her authority collapsing under the weight of witnesses. Margaret spoke softly, but the words carried. It's never been about a ramp, has it? It's about us, and you don't get to decide if we belong. Thomas's hand tightened over hers. The neighbors leaned closer, as if pulled by an unseen thread. Andre's voice fell to a quiet steel. This is the moment you decide, Miss Whitmore. Do you admit you were wrong? Or do you let the whole world see what kind of leader you really are? Karen's phone slipped slightly in her grip. The red record lights from every corner glared at her, merciless and unblinking. The silence held, heavy and electric. Karen's phone trembled in her grip, her authority slipping like water through her fingers. Dozens of cameras glared at her, unblinking, waiting for the final act. Andre didn't move. He didn't need to. His stillness was more commanding than any shout. Well, he said softly, though every neighbor heard it. Will you enforce the rules correctly or continue breaking them yourself? Karen's jaw worked, but no sound came. The crowd began to stir, the murmurs swelling into voices. She's got nothing, always picking on the Greens. About time someone stood up to her. Margaret's hand tightened in Thomas's, her shoulders squaring as she lifted her voice. You've embarrassed us long enough, Karen. But not anymore. Everyone can see what this really is. Applause sparked, scattered at first, then spreading like a flame. Neighbors clapped, some timidly, some with full force. For the first time in years, the Greens weren't isolated. The community stood with them. Karen spun, her voice shrill. You think this changes anything? I am the president. I was elected. Andre's tone sliced through hers like steel. You were elected to serve, not to harass. Tonight, you've proven you're unfit to lead. He turned to Frank. Read the process out loud. Let everyone hear it. Frank hesitated, then cleared his throat and opened the binder. Section 4, Subpart 2. Exterior modifications must be submitted for approval. But Section 6, Subpart 3 requires the board to grant reasonable accommodations for residents with medical needs. His voice steadied. That ramp is a protected accommodation. It cannot be removed. The neighbors erupted in gasps. Some cheered. A woman shouted, "So she lied." Another added, "She knew it wasn't against the rules." Karen's face drained. "That's not I didn't." Andre didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "The truth is plain. You ignored the law. You twisted the rules. And now everyone has seen it." He gestured to the glowing phones, the countless witnesses. "Try spinning this in your next meeting." Karen staggered back a step, cornered by the weight of eyes and evidence. Her phone slipped, nearly tumbling to the pavement before she caught it with trembling fingers. Margaret's voice, calm but unyielding, sealed the moment. "You tried to strip us of our dignity, but tonight, it's your mask that came off." The applause returned, louder this time, fueled by vindication. Some neighbors stepped closer to the greens, offering quiet words of support, their presence forming a protective circle. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came. The words died in her throat. For the first time, she looked small, just a woman clutching a phone, not a president commanding fear. Andre placed a steady hand on his father's shoulder. "The ramp stays, my parents stay. And from this day forward, the board will follow the law, not the whims of intimidation." The neighbors cheered, not in riotous celebration, but in the powerful rhythm of justice restored. Karen turned sharply, retreating down the walkway without another word, but the cameras followed her, capturing every step of her retreat, every ounce of her defeat. The crowd slowly dispersed, their voices buzzing with the aftershocks of what they had witnessed. But a smaller circle lingered around the Greens' porch, neighbors offering words of support, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner. For Thomas and Margaret, the weight of years of silent suffering began to lift, replaced with something warmer solidarity. Karen was gone, her retreat captured on every phone, her authority crumbling behind her like a toppled statue. Yet the ramp remained, solid and unshaken, a symbol of both necessity and defiance. Andre stood beside his parents, his uniform catching the last glow of the evening sun. His medals weren't just pieces of metal, they were silent witnesses of sacrifice, proof that honor isn't measured in HOA fines, but in the lives shaped by courage and dignity. Frank Dawson, still holding the binder, finally stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Green," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I should have spoken up sooner. You were right. The board failed you, and for that, I'm sorry. I'll call a meeting to address this properly and to reconsider Karen's position." Thomas gave a slow nod. His voice was low but firm. "What matters is that respect is restored. This home is ours, and no one has the right to take that away." Margaret squeezed his hand. Her eyes glistened, not with defeat, but with pride. "For once," she whispered, "the world saw us, and they listened." Andre looked out at the neighbors still recording, still watching. His words carried not just to them, but to every future viewer who would see the story online. A community is only as strong as the way it treats its weakest. Tonight, you saw what happens when power is abused. And you saw what happens when people stand together against it. That's what Oakwood Estates should stand for. It was for Thomas and Margaret, for every elder who had been silenced, for every family who had endured in quiet dignity. The narrator's voice closed the chapter. Respect is the true foundation of every community. Without it, no rule, no bylaw, no HOA can stand. Remember this story, and remember to stand for what's right. If this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who believes in justice, and comment below the city you're watching from. Together, we keep these stories alive.